This is the Rooted Podcast, a conversation about the Christian worldview and its implications for every part of life. The Rooted Podcast is hosted by Steve Royce and Brady Johnson. Together, they have over 2 decades of experience in the business and tech industries and share a desire to help others filter all of life through the Christian faith.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the inaugural episode of the Rooted Podcast. This is our first time doing anything like this, and so here goes, I guess, right? So a little bit about who we are and what we do. I'm Steve, and for the last, coming up on 12 years, not too long from now, I have been working for a training and curriculum development company. We are a vendor, a full service vendor who provides training solutions for other companies and brands, manufacturers that I'm sure all of you have heard of and probably see on a daily basis. And been doing that for, like I said, over a decade, and currently am a creative director in that role. So a little bit like a general contractor, I just kind of oversee all the specialists who know what they're doing way more than I do, and just kind of make sure it all comes together in the end. What about you, Brady?
Yeah, so I've pretty much been all around the board in the technology sector, everything from sales to now currently in engineering. I'm a software developer, currently focusing on a lot of cloud architecture for a startup. Yeah, I've been in the business world, specifically targeting technology for the better part of about 10 years.
Yeah, so I mean, we both have a business background. We've worked in the corporate world, the secular world, and we still have a passion though for our faith as Christians. I mean, I don't use it vocationally, but I have a undergrad in biblical studies, and about not quite 3 years ago, finished a Masters of Apologetics through Biola University's distance learning program. So I just have a passion for sharing, what I believe with others, obviously, but also helping the church to draw connections between what we believe and what's going on in the world. That we have a reasonable faith, that we have a faith that makes sense, that it stands up to scrutiny, and, all those things. But this is not an apologetics podcast because, frankly, we would be adding all of a few drops into the ocean. There's so many good apologetics resources and podcasts out there. And so certainly we won't shy away from that kind of stuff if it comes up. But that's not really what we're here about. We have a slightly different take on what we want to do with this podcast. And part of that has to do with why it's named what it is, the Rooted Podcast. When you think about roots, not to get over analytical about it, but roots do 2 things, right? They go down and they also spread out. And so the goal for the podcast is really to do both of those things. We want to help believers who may not have a super firm foundation, or maybe just haven't had the opportunity to, go to Bible college or get a theology degree or anything like that, to have a more firm foundation for what they believe and why they believe it, so that you can confidently share what you believe with others. And, as I mentioned, as a part of that, we're going to, at times, cover, apologetic, doctrinal, biblical topics to help, cement that foundation for people. And just by the way, if you have a specific question about something that comes up in any of those categories, at the end of the podcast, we'll give you, information that you can use to write to us, and we'll do what we can to, cover those things in future episodes.
Yeah, and like you said, roots, they reach out, they spread everything. Our Christian lives are the same way, right? We influence everything from finances, politics, technology. Really, every side of our life has that spiritual tie-in.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we don't always think about the fact that our spiritual lives affect every other part of life. We can tend to, I know I do. We tend to categorize as, that's what I do as a Christian, and then there's all this other stuff that it's just life stuff. It doesn't really have a spiritual dimension. And I think part of what we're about with this is to say, well, it actually does. There's really no part of life that doesn't have a spiritual dimension. And so, helping people who live and work in the secular world as Christians to think through that, to think through some of the implications of that stuff, and, hopefully to make a real difference in how they apply their faith to their lives, how they share it with others in and around the workplace, and, all that stuff. So that kind of gets into some of the why of, why we felt like this was a good idea. There's a lot of podcasts out there, but we felt like this one was a niche or a need that kind of needed to be filled. And so one of the things that we've talked about, amongst ourselves before we ever thought of doing this, is just how, as people who work in the business world, it feels like there's kind of this disconnect between the folks who do vocational ministry as a full-time job, your pastors and worship leaders and youth pastors and the people who get paid to be in those roles, and most of the rest of us. Because the fact is, the vast majority of our church, probably your church too, you don't work in ministry. Like you earn your living in some other way, right? In the business world, in the tech industry, in sales, in a helping profession, whatever. And it feels like at times for us, there's this big disconnect between how spiritual, I feel on any given day as a person who isn't in full-time ministry, and how spiritual or successful in evangelism, or even just how many opportunities I might have to share my faith that, we see pastors, maybe even our pastor, having, right? So it just feels like, wow, they just do so much more, and they're so much more in tune with God. They're so much more connected. They get so many more opportunities. And I think part of what we're about is to say, well, it doesn't have to be that way, but we'd be remiss to say, like, that there's not a reason for that, because the truth is there's a lot of data out there that says the secular world and the business world, like, it's hard to share your faith. It's hard to evangelize. And we've both had opportunities to do that. And Brady, we were talking about one right before this. So you want to share that?
Yeah, exactly. We've all been there, day in, day out, get the job done, overlook the opportunities to actually, speak to coworkers or whatever. For me personally, I had a couple opportunities years ago to start the conversation. I don't remember the specifics, but, God led me to, begin a conversation with a coworker, just kind of talking about my faith, gave her kind of a testimony. And that spawned a series of conversations that went over the course of, years of working with this company. And, through that, she asked more questions, got to know her more about my faith. I was able to invite her to church, and it started to make an impact in her life. She had an opportunity to, again, just ask those questions that, who knows who else she could have asked. But I got to be a seed, I get to just play my part as a Christian. And, she later came to know Christ and, married a Christian man, and I think probably changed the trajectory of her life, not through what I did specifically, but I got to play a part of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to think about, because, like, right over here, I'm the one with the apologetics degree. I've never led a coworker to Christ. Like, that's just not a thing that's ever happened. And it's not because I haven't had opportunities to have spiritual conversations with them. Over the years, I have had several opportunities to have, spiritual conversations, or to steer it in a certain way, even just asking questions to maybe get them to think a little bit. But I've prayed for several of my coworkers over the years that would happen, and it just hasn't yet. I'm still waiting on God to move in a particular way, but I don't know if that's just because they're not ready or circumstances are just not right yet. But point being is it's not necessarily about the result. It's about, sharing and the willingness to do that. But as we talked about, like there's some seriously big hurdles that we all can be facing. And just looking at some of the Barna Group research that's been done within the last couple of years, it's pretty recent. And we were talking about this before, but just that there's 3 ones that I pulled that really, I think, especially have something to do with what we're talking about here. And that's that there was one on, it's just called Millennials Oppose Evangelism is the name of the link. And by the way, we'll put all the links to any of this stuff that we reference in the show notes. So if you want to go and read the research for yourself or read the articles, like you'll totally be able to do that. But one quote that came out of this one was that sharing the gospel today is made harder than at any other time in recent memory by an overall cultural resistance to conversations that highlight people's differences. And good grief, if that's not true in the corporate world, it's not true anywhere, right? Like no one wants to be the one to say the emperor has no clothes and be like, some of these ideas are not as good as some of the other ideas, right? And so diversity and honoring other people's experiences, no matter what they've been, all this kind of stuff. I was at a client just this past week and saw a poster that talked about, like, you used that phrase. That's why it's, honoring everyone's experiences, no matter how different they are. And I'm just like, man, that's really vague language. We're beating around the bush here, right? But we all know kind of what's being talked about, even though it's not said in such a straightforward way. So right there's such a cultural pushback in the corporate world and the business world for, even getting anywhere near these topics. And I think it's, we all want to share our faith in the workplace, but because of factors like this, we're just not really sure how to go about it, right? It feels like there's so many barriers that are just in the way. And then, you tack onto that too. There's another piece of research that was done on Gen Z, which is, I would say, probably they would be in high school right now, maybe starting to get into college, but they're mostly in that age range. And the research that was done there is that, more than any other generation before, this generation doesn't associate with any particular religious identity, right? They want to be spiritual, and they certainly have strong moral convictions about things. But then when you add to that this third piece of research about just how our society views truth, and it said that, nearly a third, it was 32% of the respondents said that they trust nobody, only their own instincts. And then, right behind that, 27% said that they only trust friends and family members or close peers, right? So it's this weird combination of factors, right? Where in our culture today, in the workplace, in the business world especially, you have this combination of things where no one wants to talk about anything that might get them in trouble or that might be appearing to be, somehow misconstrued as like judging another group of people. And here we are, the Christians, with this objective truth claim, saying that we claim to know something about the way the world actually is and history that has happened. And that's not popular. But then if you add to it, people who want to be spiritual and this increasing desire to feel some sort of connection and transcendent, bigger purpose, bigger meaning in life. But I don't want I define my own morals by my instincts, just whatever kind of seems right to me and not anything outside of that. It's this weird place to then walk in and say, well, hey, over here we have an objective truth claim and we're claiming that your instincts are actually, they can be garbage when it comes to accurately understanding what's really real and what isn't. And it feels like ice skating uphill. You're just, it's easy to look at a situation like that and just feel like, why bother? Or it's just too hard, or no one's going to listen to me anyway, all these different things.
Yeah. And because it feels so hard, this is where, having some practical application is really important, finding those ways that you can apply simple evangelism, right? You're going to a coffee with a coworker, or you're taking, your lunch breaks together, and, that can spark a conversation. There's just many opportunities that we miss because we're walking on eggshells, because we're not, being considerate to what the Holy Spirit's offering us.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, we're not experts on this by any stretch, but, we've both had opportunities to have spiritual conversations in the workplace. And I think it's something that, we tend to overthink, or we put too much pressure on ourselves, as if we have to have, all the answers to all the possible questions all the time. And the reality is that you just have to be good at listening and asking really good questions. And you can drive an amazing spiritual conversation just by asking good questions, and by, knowing where you want to take the conversation ahead of time. And so that's kind of what we're wanting to focus on, is just providing some of those tools for those of us who work in the business world, who want to have a spiritual impact where we live, where we work, but we either just have anxiety about doing it right. We don't want to mess it up. We don't want to certainly endanger, any career opportunities that we have. Our families depend on us. We don't want to do anything that could cause us to lose our job. But at the same time, we want to be effective for the kingdom. So if that means just knowing how to represent Christ well in my workplace, or if it does mean that, I have to be willing to take some risks, the point is that doing all that is I think easier than sometimes we think. And so that's what we'd like to do, is to provide some of that practical application, and also just a way for, a lot of us who go to church on Sundays and then live out in the world the rest of the week. Sometimes that connection between Sunday worship and the rest of the week is not as close as we'd like it to be, if we're being honest. And so that's another thing that we're interested in doing, is to kind of help close that gap, and to help anyone who feels like they're stuck, living a certain way at work because they have to, and wanting to be more like who they are on Sunday, to be able to think through some of those things, and to just bring more consistency to how we think in our lives about spirituality, spiritual things, and living out our Christian faith. So, to summarize, we've both experienced it. Evangelism in our culture today, it's a hard sell. It's not something that is really a natural conversation pretty much at any point of the time. And so it is easier to kind of just ignore that part of life at work. But frankly, we'll just call it what it is. That's disobedience, right? Jesus called us to share the gospel, to make disciples. And if we're not actively trying to at least find opportunities to have spiritual conversations with people, then, we just believe that that's disobedience, right? And so, since most of us in the workplace, we don't have a theology background, we don't have, Bible college education, what we're going to try and do is take a more business-minded approach, because we have that background as well, and to kind of share some of our experiences, but also just some business and even sales approaches that you can take in your workplace that are, I think, absolutely going to help you navigate these spiritual conversations in a way that you're going to actually get to see pretty much immediate results from. So we want you to be able to share your faith in that context, because it's one that we've had to do ourselves. And so we want to be a resource. Really, that's what this boils down to. We have some experience, but as I said, we're not experts, but we want to just be a resource for our brothers and sisters who live and work in, a similar context to what we do. And so we're hoping that we can provide something for you that's going to help make you more effective.
Yeah, exactly. And, at the end of the day, we're all going through life. Everybody has a job. Everybody's got their, personal experiences that they're going to go through. And finding that way that we can tie back, a Sunday message to a practical application, whether it be with a coworker or, friends and family. I think that's what I'm so excited about this podcast, is it's a good opportunity for us. I know we spend a lot of time talking about specific instances that we might have had throughout the work week, and this is a perfect medium to kind of share those experiences with others who, are in the same boat.
Yeah, that's what you're in for. So we hope you'll join us, and we'll be on this journey together. But we're really excited about what might come from this, and we just hope that someone somewhere finds it encouraging and uses what we are discussing here to strengthen their faith and to make more of an impact in their workplace.
Thanks for joining us on the Rooted Podcast, a creation of Rooted Productions and an affiliate of the Oasis Church in Gilbert, Arizona. For more information about the podcast, or to submit a question or comment, please visit us at rooted.productions. Follow us on Instagram at rooted.productions, or email podcast@rooted.productions. That's rooted.productions. We hope you'll join us next time.